Welcome to Untethering Shame, the podcast where we explore how shame shapes our lives and uncover ways to rise above it. I'm your host, Kyira, and today we're diving into a topic that impacts families everywhere: shame and the idea of falling behind in school. Children are naturally curious, eager to learn, and full of potential. But in a system that prioritizes benchmarks and standardized measures, the label of falling behind can feel like a heavy burden, not just for the child, but for their parents too. What happens to a child's confidence, joy, and sense of worth when they're made to feel like they don't measure up? And how can parents and educators help children rediscover their love of learning, despite the pressures to conform? Our guest today, Amy Herzog, has spent 25 years teaching and tutoring children with innovative, play-based methods that bring joy and creativity back into education. The founder of Spark Joy with Amy, she helps young learners thrive by tailoring education to their unique interests and learning styles. Amy is on a mission to debunk the notion of being behind and inspire families to celebrate every step of a child's journey, no matter how unconventional. In this episode, we're going to explore the shame children feel when they're labeled as behind, the impact on their self-worth, and how parents can advocate for their children's unique learning styles. So if you're a parent, an educator, or someone that has people in your life that are in the education system, this episode is for you. Get comfortable, turn off all of your distractions, and let's dive in. Hi, Amy. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, so good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Okay, so this is my first podcast recording of 2025. So this is kind of exciting. I know,
Happy
right?
New Year.
The irony being that we're going to talk about kids and falling behind. And at this time, even though it's not coming out today, there's all these parents and caregivers that their kids have been home for 2 weeks, that they're exhausted, that they've got to get back to school, but they're already feeling behind with all the things that are going to need to happen going into the rest of the semester and all of those things. And so before we dive into all of this, I want to just do a quick check-in with you. So I love to just kind of do one-word check-ins just to get a feel where we're at coming into any episode. So if you could describe how you're feeling January 2nd, 2025, what is one word that you would use to describe how you're feeling right now?
It's a good question. Okay, sometimes words come to me and then I have to go look them up because then I'm like, wait, why did that word come? And is this what I mean?
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
It's a very strange thing and it typically works. So I'm going to say the word reticent came to mind.
Ooh, I like that word.
My life has been in such an amazing flow and there's been so much goodness coming. But there are some things on the horizon that are very troublesome in our world at large that I don't really know what to expect. So I'm trying to stay in the flow of like presence and gratitude and hope while having some concerns on the side.
Yeah, which I feel like the word I was thinking for me, so it sounds like somewhat similar to you, is a sense of, I guess, vigilance feels too strong. I think aware is what came up to me first. And this idea of I feel more aware of myself. I feel more aware and present in my life. I've done a lot of work in this last year to do a lot of healing, to really think about who's the mom I want to be, who's the partner I want to be, the homeowner I want to be, the business owner I want, and how do those work together? I'm also aware of a lot of things that I can't control. And I think that's something that I have to make sure that I don't try to move that awareness into a category where I can control it, but instead to notice awareness and then response are really kind of the things that I can focus on. And so I can definitely see that. And I think our world at large, my daughter's going to kindergarten next year. I've got all these other bigger transitions that are going to be happening. And so it's these like really positive, powerful, aware things. And then also these sort of ambiguous, in reality, they're neutral because we don't have anything to assume positive or negative yet, but they feel like they're going to be bigger and negative. And I don't always know what to do with that. And so, yeah. Okay. So knowing that, I think coming into that, I really love that opportunity to connect with people and to get a feel for what they're thinking, because I I think it helps us center on like how we show up to any conversation. And the conversation we're having now about falling behind and kids, there is that same experience, I think, that we're talking about now, but for many parents and caregivers and for individual children and the teachers and everyone around of like, where are we at? Are we going to fall behind? Is something going to happen? And sort of this awareness and control tension and all these pieces that can come into play. And so before we even dive into the depth of this, can you give us a little context as to what it means when we say falling behind and really where this term came from? Because I feel like I was a part of when it took place. Like I remember being in school when the No Child Left Behind movement happened. And I'm assuming it wasn't a thing before that, but now it's like this concept of falling behind is like the most dominant fear-driven motivation for parents, caregivers, and educators that I have ever seen. And it doesn't seem like it's as helpful as it was marketed to be.
That's a great, yeah. Well, I think back when it was marketed, No Child Left Behind. Now, I can't say if there were origins deeper than that. I don't have experience with that, but I also remember the No Child Left Behind. And at that time, it felt very positive to embrace that we need to support all kids and not just those that are naturally flourishing, right? So it felt like a real intention to support kids of all different races, different abilities, different socioeconomic statuses and whatnot. What you're describing now, I believe, has a deep, lasting impact from our years in quarantine. And what happened was our system got shook to the core. We did not go to school. We did not keep our trajectory of what's to be expected. And education took a vast detour on so many levels. Some people thrived on Zoom school. Some people couldn't cope on Zoom school. I think educators, there's such a variety of how people educate to begin with in the classroom, but then you took it to a technology level, and some were amazing at producing things that were engaging, and some probably were not. Mm-hmm. As is true when they go to school as well, but this made it a little bit more. Then you add on top of that, whatever the educator's providing, then you add on top of that what the home environment was providing. Then we go back to school and the kids are not at the same place that we anticipate them being in our usual run-of-the-mill life where we would go to school every day. Mm-hmm. So now they are behind in the sense that they're not equipped to start second grade where they used to start second grade. They're not equipped to write the way that they used to write. There's this huge shift. And in my opinion, we lost an opportunity to make some radical reform. Instead of acknowledging that this isn't working, the machine just kept cranking along the same way, like it's a factory, right? It just kept cranking along, like this is what we teach and this is when we teach it. And so the kids are behind this mechanism. Instead of saying the mechanism is outdated and it's not working anymore, and maybe we should take a big look and an overhaul. No, now we've just said this train has kept moving and the kids are behind. They haven't jumped on it. And so there's so much stress on the teachers who are going, wait, I'm supposed to teach the same thing I always taught. And these kids don't have the foundational skills that they used to have. The stress on the parents, like my child is hating school, then there becomes behavior issues and my child's stressed and sad and doesn't want to go to school. And then you have the stress on the child that's like showing up in their sweet little jovial selves and slamming into a wall of things that they are not capable of doing yet. So it's just been like a catastrophe, really.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like, as you're describing these system errors, they were definitely there before COVID, but it seems like COVID was a catalyst to really amplify a lot of these things and then gave, like in many areas from a large infrastructure standpoint and individual standpoint, there were many invitations to pivot, to adapt, to, like you said, reform. And in this case, it wasn't taken. And so as you were talking, I think a lot about this idea that education is really a content-focused system versus a context-driven program. And so context being, what is the home life? What is the teacher's capacity? What, if we think about this kid in this class with this type of teacher that maybe didn't learn as well as they could have from this other type of teacher, or with a different grouping of children, or with a different level of support. Instead, we go, well, no, everybody's expected to perform it this way. And if you're in second grade and this is where you're at, then you're just behind. And we've really created a system that conveniently anchors the kid as the problem, which kind of allows the larger system to wash their hands and be like, well, it's not us. Because look at our curriculum is solid and all these other kids can do it. So clearly the problem is this child. And then with COVID, with quarantine, we saw the problem children, quote unquote, the numbers grew. And now it wasn't just this small percentage, it was a significant percentage. And we had teacher burnout and we had family burnout. And we still have not really addressed the collective trauma of going through a global pandemic together. Like the grace was there for a couple months and then it was just sort of done with. And so, I don't think as a culture we do a really great job, particularly, I can only say this living in the US, that we do a great job on long-term healing because we're so doing oriented that it's, well, everybody got leave and support. We made these really great videos and everybody got therapy, right? So you should be fine. There's nothing left, instead of going, gosh, this is actually a much bigger, like the wheel got put off course and it never was going to come back on. So even if you're close, there's still stuff happening. And so I'm curious about this because I think about this for me. I mean, I was the straight A student all through school. I had, even with the trauma I was going through, I am really good at performing. And so I was A's all the way through my master's program because I know how to perform. I am now 37, still figuring out how to learn. And those are two very different pieces. And so I'm curious just what's coming up for you as I'm saying all of these things and thinking about, again, sort of the villain being painted or the problem being painted as the child, and in turn, the parent or the caregiver. Yeah. And then this idea that it's really about needing to perform better because the grace and space to learn and to flail that we give them through pre-K is just kind of gone. Yeah. And now you're like, but now you're behind because you can't do this thing that we've all collectively decided you need to do to function in the world. And you're the problem if you can't figure it out. And so everybody else just needs to like show up for this kid better and take it on and get them there. Or else we should just, again, cast them aside. We just won't say we're leaving them behind because that's bad form.
Yeah. We're not leaving them behind. They're behind. That is the biggest problem that I have. Yeah. Yeah. We are not the problem. We didn't do anything. They are just behind. And this has been so detrimental to our kids. I am seeing the fallout of this. And I've been working with students in the school setting my whole career for 25 years. Now, I wasn't always a tutor, but I'm a full-time tutor now. So now I've just started working with the homeschool population of kids. And it is striking to me to see their spirits. It's just very different. Like kids always, I think, have this natural, amazing spirit. But I see it dampened by kids who have attended school. And I see it wide open, like heart forward, joyful, experiential, curious, safe with the kids that are homeschooling. It's just striking. And I can understand why. Because the kids that are going to see me who are coming from school are typically the ones that are not performing well in the classroom. So they're the ones being called behind. So they are attending the hours and hours every day. They're going to a place where they don't feel at peace, at ease. It's a constant struggle to try to participate in this thing that is not meeting them where they're at. So that's been an interesting observation of mine recently. The other thing I wanted to talk to is calling them behavior problems. And, we're here talking about shame. And I would say I have some shame here because, I was a classroom teacher, and kids who didn't play by the rules, sit still, raise their hand to talk, follow multiple step directions. The kids who were more vocal and boisterous and needed to move and act it out, those were like behavior problems. But what I'm learning so much more now is that their behavior is information. They're not here to try to be a jerk in your classroom. They just literally need a different way to approach the content that you're sharing. And in my private practice, I'm able to provide that and allow their autonomy and their input and their creativity. And it's amazing. I learned so much from the kids who are labeled as problem child because they probably have ADHD and they don't look like they're listening. They don't look you in the eyes. I have been in the classroom with a dear friend, and I've seen her like stressing. She's like, oh, that guy's not listening. They're not looking. And that used to be me. And now I know I've worked one-on-one with a student who's not looking at me and does not look like he's listening. But this child, one-on-one, doesn't look like he's listening to me. Then he goes home and does the thing that I was talking about that looked like there was no connection being made. Why? Because his brain is operating in multiple modes right now. And it is not a visual mode looking at me. And it may not even be in an auditory mode answering to me, but his brain is processing what I'm saying and processing whatever else is going on in his world. Those things in a school setting, it looks like they're not listening because they're not looking and they're not answering and they're not whatever, but they are processing. And then their bodies need to move. And so if they're not sitting still, you think, oh, they're not listening. Point being, these kids who seem like behavior problems, there's no problem. They're just communicating to you that this is not working for them to sit still, look you in the eye, raise their hand, and answer you at a particular time when you deem it allowed.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because I think one of the questions that I really was holding on to is this idea of how do you think this terminology affects kids, really thinking about their emotional, their academic performance, their sense of self. And what you're hitting at is, and you see it, and I think we can use homeschooling versus sort of in the school system as an example, where when you're able to work in an individual space where the goal isn't compliance, and it's not just compliant children, but it's compliant teachers to meet administrative marks to then keep funding and keep all these things. It's all the way up the chain. The focus is compliance. When you can be in a setting that removes that and allows for the context to come in. Gosh, my kid didn't get, or, this kid I'm working with doesn't even have to be the parent or the caregiver. They didn't get a lot of sleep. They had a really bad viral infection last week. And right now they're going to feel like a little bit crappy and they might be a little bit irritable. And so let's focus on ways that we can make this a bit more fun today. Or, maybe today's a day that we just don't do this and we look at a different time. When you can weave that in with some curiosity as to what's going on, it feels much easier. But I think it's also the idea of, as a teacher, when you're working one-on-one, obviously you still have to perform a certain way. The parents are hiring you or the caregivers are hiring you. You still want to be able to do the things that you want to be able to do for them and to meet some of those goals. But I think that there's such a fear in these school systems where you have X number of kids at one time. The kids inadvertently in your brain get coded as a threat rather than a peer in the space, a peer learner, a peer, like you might still have a role, you're still the teacher, but we can't co-create the space. We can't explore, we can't respond. So you're all potential barriers to me doing what I need to do. And I'm so afraid that I'm going to get marked down. And so then again, it all boils back down to you're the problem. And this idea that, I have Everly, my daughter, the preschool that she goes to is one of the only preschools in our area where they don't kick anybody out. And I didn't quite understand the importance of that until I've now gotten the opportunity to meet and see some of these kids she's gone to school with for the last 2 years. and hear the stories of these 3-4-year-old kids getting kicked out of programs for behaviors because they have behavior problems and they are an issue and they can't be in this space and they are unsafe and all of these things. And it's not just watching the kids, it's also watching the parents where they start, like, how could you not start to internalize a bias towards it? And then you start to, I've seen it where we'll have play dates and the parents will automatically assume that their kid was the one that did something. And I'm like, my kid's also a 4-year-old learning social skills, and she might also have played a part in this. Like, just because she looks like she performs differently in the classroom and maybe hasn't gotten kicked out of any schools doesn't mean my kid isn't also capable of being hurtful and harmful unintentionally because they're 4 and they're figuring it out. And so all of this to say, I'm just thinking about this because that falling behind is a message starting to be received that young, 3 and 4 years old, coming into, I mean, now when we're thinking about COVID, kids coming into kindergarten, first grade, second grade, like you said, they're not equipped with the skills, but the bus is still moving at full force. And so we've just got to get them all through as quickly as possible. And I have seen a shift, I feel like, in how much homeschooling is happening, how much people are doing that. The tricky part is not everybody wants to do that or is capable of doing that. And so it's also like, what do we do if that can't be the answer for everyone? And also, what do we do to not just be like, well, the school system's fucked, we can't do anything about it? How do we as parents, as caregivers, as educators, and most importantly, the kids that we're supporting, what can we do to get out of this mindset that's really creating emotionally and psychologically unhealthy mindsets for these children that become adults, that come in with shame that not only affects their academic performance, but it stalls them in so many other areas that we have yet to even link and make connections to?
Yeah, absolutely. You've hit on a really important, this is all we have control over is ourselves. We don't control our child. We don't control the school system. We don't control the teacher. So the only thing that we can do is control our mindset. And this is a big piece that I work with my parents on. And this term behind is not helping anybody. It's not motivating. They're not doing poorly for lack of motivation. It's lack of support and personalizing the learning to how they best learn. So what I would encourage parents to do is park that behind term. Just, it's out of here. It has no place. And once you do, what I like to tell people is that your child is perfectly where they are right now. It absolutely makes sense that they know what they know based on the experience that they've had, the quarantine that they experienced, the social engagement that they've had, the academic space that they've held. Everything that they know is what they know. And there's no use shaming them for what they know and what they don't know. And this is a huge piece. Kids are feeling badly about themselves at a young age based on what they know. And that is a crisis and it is a travesty. It's not just, I don't know something. It's, I am bad because I don't know something. I don't belong because I don't know something. And it is so detrimental to our kids' mental health. So the first thing is for parents to stop using behind. Stop using this term. Your child is not behind anything. Our systems are behind figuring out how to support them in group setting. And I understand it. I lived and worked and breathed the school system. I am not anti-school system, but I am trying to do what I can to help in a situation that's not going well. It's not going well for even my veteran teacher friends of 25 years holding on for retirement because the burnout is real. The stress is real. So if we can change our mindset to say, my child knows exactly what they know. They are beautiful. They are capable. We need your child just as they are. If they are creative and imaginative and they think outside the box, we need those innovative thinkers. If your child is quiet and contemplative, we need those quiet thinkers. If your child is loud and boisterous, we need those leaders. We need them to be who they are, exactly as they are. So embracing and parenting the child you have. I struggled with this. My child had big feelings. He still does. And you know what? As I grow older, I realize I do too. But it was hard to parent someone with big feelings who didn't like to transition away from the park, or who felt things from 0 to 60. And then I matched that 0 to 60. I had to work on myself to not match that 0 to 60. So that internal work is really important. Parents, love your child for who they are, how they are, exactly as they are right now. Get out of the comparison trap. Comparison is the thief of joy. It's easy to fall prey to on social media. We are comparing ourselves constantly. I have a dear person that I follow on social media, and she looks amazing. She's smiling and radiant, and she's confident, and she's lost a lot of weight recently, and it just looks beautiful. And behind the scenes, there's some really sad things going on. And there were reasons why she needed to fix her health, because there's some major health crises in her family. And every time I talk to her behind the scenes, we come to tears. Social media is not showing the tear side. Social media is not showing the reason, the impetus behind getting healthy. I just say that because we can even know that this is going on behind the scenes and be deluded that it's all good because it looks shiny and beautiful and bright. And it is. That's not a lie, but it's not the whole story. So we have to do intentional work to stop comparing our lives, our kids, ourselves, and just get really present. What is it right now? What does my child need right now? Be an advocate for your child. Work with your child's teacher, the administrators. I was talking today on my podcast with an occupational therapist who helped with emotional regulation, sensory processing, fine and large motor skills. Did you know that this is a resource you can have? It's amazing to get that kind of support from highly trained, educated occupational therapists. So look and see what other resources you have that you can grab your tribe and love that kid as hard as you can.
Yeah. And I think so much of, I've worked with children in partial hospitalization programs, intensive outpatient programs, and where the behind story of school is really strong. They've been pulled out of school. They're struggling with really severe and persistent mental health issues and eating disorders. And so it's interesting to see when the stakes are high enough where the school system actually does shift to more of a context-driven approach, because there's enough going on that now they've decided that this kid needs this more personalized approach and response. And not every teacher and school is equal. I obviously, working with different people, would get different responses and different expectations. But I think two things that really came up in what you were talking about is, one, I'm really proud of myself. Most days I feel like I'm a shitty parent. I've now learned that that's just being a parent. That is a normal response.
Right.
I just am able to articulate. Yeah, I'm just a parent, and I don't know if I'm fucking up or not. And chances are I probably am. So the best thing I can do is just be open to the learning. But I think one thing I'm really proud of myself for is, since Everly was born, obviously she couldn't do it for the first couple of years of her life, but I've always encouraged the idea that she is allowed to ask why. There might be things that I, as her parent, tell her she can or can't do. She has a right to understand why I am making that statement. And so if she says, and I talked about this in an episode recently where she asked me one morning if she could have a mint before school. And I immediately was like, no. And she's like, well, can I ask why? And I didn't have a good, my only real reason is it's too early in the morning. But I don't really understand the logic behind that. She knows she can't have more than 1 mint a day. That's just a rule we have in our house. But what difference does it make if she has it at 8 a.m. or 4 p.m. at night? I don't have a good reason. So when she asked me, I was like, good call. I actually don't have a good reason. I'm okay with it today, I think. Let me mull on it. So she's having this mint. But it was the willingness to be wrong that I think is so important. And I feel like when you talked about the system, there isn't a lot of space to ask why. Like even me from the outside, when we see all these metrics and things that people are supposed to have to do by the time that they, graduate high school, who sits in a room and goes, I don't know, why? Why do they need to know the Pythagorean theorem? Like, what? I don't know. What if they didn't? What if instead, because a lot of us did, what if instead we taught them emotion regulation skills or I don't know, how to sew a hole in a pocket? Like, why that? I'm just not totally sure. And so because no one on the upper end is asking why, and people on the bottom sides of it, the teachers, the aides, the principals, and the students, they're in a fear-based system. So they don't feel like they are empowered or emboldened enough to ask why.
Yeah.
Everyone's just doing this thing. And so I feel like there's a need to cultivate curiosity then, because we can't control that. We can fight back. We can do what we can for teacher reform, supporting our teachers. Yes, absolutely. But at the end of the day, we don't have that much control over that. We can use our voice, but whether or not something changes isn't ultimately on us. But we can control if we're bringing the curiosity into our home. Okay, honey, you got a C on your test and you're feeling like you're not doing as well. Why? Why are you bad? Because you got, and that curiosity that we could invite, why are you bad? Because your essay didn't score as well, or because you're having a harder time knowing how to use these different things. Are you actually bad? Does that actually mean that? And so it's that piece I think you're bringing in. And then the second part, and then I'm curious what's coming up for you that I feel like we're missing is I don't feel like parents and caregivers, because we're all in the hustle game, we don't know how to grieve. So for many of us, we don't know how to grieve the fact that what it looks like to be a parent or to support my child looks different than what the fairy tale told me. And now I have to do these things. And I don't know how to grieve that because now I have to deal with, oh my gosh, is something wrong with my kid? Is something wrong with me? Did I do this? Is there something happening? We immediately turn inward towards ourselves or our children. And we don't quite go, oh, maybe this is a context situation. Maybe this is that the school is just not the right support. Maybe it's something else. Maybe I have to explore it. So instead it's now there's shame. People are going to think I'm a bad parent. People are going to think they're a bad kid. And there's I have 10,000 things to do because I also have shame that I'm supposed to be a doer. So I can't afford to take time off of work. I can't afford to do these things. I can't not perform in all these other areas of my life to take this on because that's also shame and a risk to me. And then all these other cascades. And so I feel like there's a need to grieve along with some radical acceptance that the world that we live in is not designed for most of us to feel like we're allowed to pause and think about what support looks like, not only for our kids, but for ourselves, because we feel like we have to keep moving so fast.
And when we do, as you were speaking, I was reminding myself when my son started kindergarten, I was so excited because I was a kindergarten teacher before that. And so I was, the first in the door. Hi, how can I help? Can I volunteer? And his teacher was really open. So she let me come in the first week to volunteer and participate. Well, I immediately saw that her style of teaching was not going to be a fit for my child because she just sat and talked and didn't have routines. And after a half hour of taking roll and just saying whatever was on her mind, my kid's rolling on the floor. And so I was, quote unquote, that parent that went to the principal and said, this is not going to work. You're not going to call my son a behavior problem because this teacher is not moving things at a kindergarten pace here. But just that saying, that parent. So then I felt ashamed for speaking up for my child and advocating for him right off the bat. I mean, I've just come to the school. I'm just new on the town. And here I am making demands already. Like, how dare I? And no, I'm a really good person. Like, I love school. And, you have to, but there is this fear of advocating even, or of having a mama bear reaction, or having a strong stand too. Those are important things to have when it's your child at stake and they don't have the power to do that. So that was one thing that came up. Another thing that you were mentioning, like, oh, you got a C. Well, why is it that we only see the C?
Yes.
We are so focused on grades. I want to know, well, did you understand it? Did you get the math concept? Can we work on the part that you didn't understand? I don't care if you have a C. That C is just information for me to see that either you don't understand the concept, which I want to help you with, or the teacher has some jacked up grading system that I don't care about. I don't care if you got a C if you showed up in the best way that you could.
Yes.
So there's that mindset that we can work on too. We are so driven by grades. And, some people are entering kindergarten with their kid, like they got to make it to Yale and they, stop, slow down a second. This is the basis for me is I want kids to learn because life is a constant opportunity to learn. We don't stop learning. And I think when we do stop learning, that's when we get into some problems. And I feel that I even got complacent about learning. Like, I go to my job. I know what I do. I'm not really like growing. But in the last 2 years, being on my own in business and like learning online business, I have grown tremendously. And it's an absolute blast. It's a joy. It's not always easy. I have been in tears. I have let go of the reins sometimes when it felt too overwhelming. Thank God for those moments though, because they help me relate to kids who are struggling in school and don't get to let go of the reins. But my whole mission, if I've done my job, I've helped to support a child to love learning. And to me, that's way more important than the grade. That's more important than the pace. That's more important than anything. Because if they love learning, if they can show up as a learner and a curious person in their life, then they're going to be okay because they're going to keep growing. And there's multiple opportunities to continue to do so. The way your child said, can I ask why? I love that. Like, she didn't just go, why? Like sometimes there's that stage, that developmental stage where it's why? You can't ever come to the end of that rabbit hole. But can I ask why? Like, I don't get it. And then you're like, wait, I don't really get it either. So let's renegotiate that answer. I retract. But that's beautiful. And it also reminded me of the gals that I am business colleagues with and interviewed on my podcast. Her family elevates making mistakes. So they go around the table and share how they made a mistake today or this week. Mistakes were not allowed in my life. I lived in a very black and white, you do this and you don't do that world. But mistakes are the best things that happen to us. They're the place where we go, oh, that's where you don't have an understanding yet. Let's work on that. So I try to celebrate mistakes as like, oh, I'm so glad you made that mistake because I want to tell you about blah, blah, blah. Or that's my favorite mistake. Here's how to overcome that line of thinking, or here's a strategy to learn this part. Mistakes are great. And when you talked about parenting, like fucking up and doing a bad job, yes, we are parents. It's just, we are human and there is no perfect parent. It just doesn't exist. And the one that you think is perfect, that's part of their imperfection is acting perfect because we're not perfect and we do mess up. And I'm here to tell you today, I feel like, talk about shame. I had the biggest shame complex about my relationship with my son. And now we are so close. He's 20 years old. And I just want to tell you that there is forgiveness. There is forgettability with some of the things you did that were screw up. And there's healing. And there's just like giving them permission to screw up too. Like, I screwed up. Yeah, you screw up. Yeah, I'm going to repair that. The biggest thing we can do when we mess up is the repair. It's the not repairing. That's the worst thing you can do. But when you repair, there's healing there and there's beauty there. It's like those Japanese bowls with the gold filling, right? It's the cracks that we fill in with gold that make it a really unique, beautiful masterpiece. And that's what our lives are.
I love that. I feel like as we are bringing this to a close, there's a couple things that you said that are really standing out to me. And I like that terminology because you kind of highlighted that idea of that parent. And I think we have this notion of being that parent or our kid being that kid. And we're so afraid. And I've talked about this before, where there are times where I have to really check my shame around my kid's job isn't to be compliant to what I think other people, like she might have a big feeling at Target. That doesn't make her a shitty person. And my desire to get her to stop has to do with my internalized bias around kids are supposed to be compliant. And if she's not, what's the reflection on me as a parent? And so I think for many of us as parents and caregivers, there's sort of two pieces that I want you to take away is this willingness to sort of be curious about your own shame and your own pressure, because as soon as you hear those terms behind, or you see that grade and maybe it's not the A or the B or whatever you were expecting them to do or perform at, you will then put your story onto that. It's all your shame coming through. And you're either going to do it as a way to try to protect them from feeling the rejection you felt, or you're going to do it to try to protect yourself because you're so afraid that they are a reflection of you. And what does that mean? And so I think for many of us, it's really reflecting on what does it look like to let go of the comparison pieces? What does it look like to let go of the pressure that my kid is supposed to do this by this age, or my kid is supposed to have this skill mastered? And instead really think about, how am I and how are they learning every day? I mean, one of the best things I have done is I have tried to start doing things with my daughter where I don't know what I'm doing, so that she can see that and she can witness that and she can watch me learn. My husband's doing that. When we bought our house, there was a piano here when we moved in, and our realtor was like, I would keep it. You could always sell it if you don't want it, but maybe you guys will want to play. And he's like, I'm going to learn to play the piano. And he had never played the piano before in his life. And so now he's learning how to play the piano, and he screws up. And this app that they use, you get a certain number of stars as you're performing. And there's times where my daughter will be like, how many stars, Dad? And he'll be like, I didn't get any today. And she'll be like, you did a really good job. And so we can celebrate that. And so it's very fun to watch. But I think the other thing that you said that's really key that I'm taking away is and I think it goes hand in hand, is the willingness to be that parent, to be the parent that is, you don't have to come in and attack the teacher and attack the school. You can come in with curiosity for that teacher in the school, because they're, again, stuck in a system that is based on fear and compliance as well. But it is okay to ask why, the same as I want to empower us to ask our kids to do that. Hey, why is this a thing? Why are we approaching it this way? I'm having a hard time understanding why my son is the problem. It seems like maybe there are some opportunities that we could be supporting him rather than alienating him. And that's not always going to be met with, yes, let's do that. Like, you might have to then be, like you said, the mama bear of like, this is bullshit and I'm going to get something different. But I think being willing to be the person that sometimes causes a stir, because what we know is that if we ask teachers, principals, administrators, people all the way up and like highest levels of government, most of them could not explain to you why we need to know all of these things to be a quote unquote good student. We just know that that's what we were taught. And so it is okay to disrupt a system that none of us can really explain why the system is entirely this way. And you can model to your kids by showing them that disruption that they are not the problem. There is ways to hold them accountable, because I think then we swing to the other side. We're not saying they're not accountable for their actions and behaviors. It's important that they do understand that there are times that they might have to be in an environment where they do have to sit still. Okay, how do we help them learn that skill? How do we help give them the tools to be able to do that and help hold them accountable to those things that they may need to do in their life? But also, how do we again come back to, and what do we do to support them in learning that, rather than just labeling them as a problem? And so, okay, all of this, because I know we could go on for like 3 more hours, but in the interest of knowing that we have to wrap up, I'm curious, 2 things. One, you're going to have people listening to this that are in that parent or caregiver role. We're also going to have people listening to this that are in an educator role. And so I'm curious if you could maybe gift each one of them with food for thought, an exercise, a next step. What's one thing for each role that they could maybe take with them from this episode? And then we'll get to how they connect with you, because I know there's also a lot of people that are going to be like, I don't want one thing, I want all the things. And I need Amy in my life way deeper.
I love it. Thank you. Yeah. So as educators, I want to open up that you have been given mandates and the stress and the pressure is real. And listen to your gut instinct that if this child is having a challenge with how things are going in your class, what would be a way to come alongside of them and support them and make them feel treasured in your class. Like, I had to sit one child at his own desk one year in kindergarten, but he wanted to be an astronaut. So I was like, astronauts have their own desk and this is going to be your station. And, celebrate that child for who he is and what he can bring, and make them feel so happy to be in your room, so loved, so cherished, and so seen. You're going to see that behaviors will change as soon as they feel heard and seen. I can't say that that's any different for parents, right? Your child wants to feel loved and heard and seen. And sometimes our own agenda and our own shame, like you said, of looking bad, appearances at the park, my son would be the one I'd be pulling out, kicking and screaming because I didn't want to leave. I was embarrassed. I was ashamed. And so working together with your child to have them feel seen and heard and have a voice. One thing we would do is say, do you want to leave in 5 minutes or 10 minutes? And both of those were fine with me. And then they got to have some control. Everyone also wants control. Parent the child you have, not the one you wish you had, and get lots of support around you.
I think what you just said, if we had only said that just for the parent side, is like, that's it. Parent the child you have. And I think it's not the child you wish you had or the child you think you're supposed to have. And I think it's that, like, our expectations all rooted in that, and just going, gosh, they're beautiful and they're amazing. And guess what? Every single kid sometimes super sucks. I love my daughter. I really do. And hey, I was a kid at some point. Even as an adult, sometimes I super suck.
I was just going to say that. Sometimes I super suck.
Yeah, like that's just what it means to be human. And so you don't need compliance. We need connection. And so really kind of bringing that back into place. And so, gosh, Amy, this was lovely. Okay, before we wrap, where can everybody go to find you, to learn more? Where can they listen to your podcast? Give them all the goodies, and I'll make sure that I get them down in the show notes as well.
Thank you so much. I would just welcome anyone who wants to join me. I have a free Facebook group called the Reading Playground, where I help parents to learn ways to play to teach their struggling or resistant reader, or maybe they're a new reader. And you'll find me at Spark Joy with Amy on Instagram. That is where I host my podcast. I call it an Instacast. It's live on Instagram on Thursdays. I also have Spark Joy with Amy on YouTube, where I'm downloading those podcasts as well. So lots of places to connect. My website is sparkjoywithamy.com. Sparking joy all around.
I love that. And Amy, I really appreciate you coming on and just opening up this conversation, because I think, one of the things that can happen is we can start to just feel apathetic in the system and or just kind of resolved to a broken system. And I think we're not sitting here saying everything else is the problem and we have no control and we're just kind of bitching. We're saying, look, there are some really major issues, and some things we can control and some things we can't. So let's call out what we see, and then let's think about sustainable solutions to support us, to support our children, if we're in an educator role, to support all of the lives of children that we get to see, and to also create space for more grace for all of us, to recognize that we are trying to do work in a system that's not designed for all of us to be seen and to feel supported in this way. And so, listeners, I really want to go back to what Amy said, to really focus on that takeaway. I think coming back into, how do we show up and love the person in front of us? And honestly, this is like a lesson in life as a whole, not just in parenting and teaching. Really thinking about, instead of all the pressure, all the expectation, all the fear, all the demands, just being present and really getting curious about, what are they needing? What am I needing? How are we co-creating a safe space for us to be in this setting? And what would that look like to take some of that shame and fear out of this space to allow for that to happen? And so doing that with grace and kindness for yourself, for everyone around you. Remembering as you go through this, come back and let us know in the comments, particularly what comes up over time. If you put some of this in practice, if you sort of create those micro shifts with your child and what that looks like for you, so we can build that resilience in that community. Or if there are more questions and things that we need for Amy to pop back in or for us to send her way so we can talk about in her Facebook group or through her Instagram lives as well. So as always, we'll see you all back here next Sunday. If you are interested in staying in the know whenever a new episode comes out, be sure to click that subscribe button. Share this with someone else you think could benefit from hearing it. But for now, stay open, stay curious. Remember, this is a journey, not a destination that we are seeking.